Welcome back to Season 2, Episode 10, Secret of My Excess. This is the episode in which Spike becomes a greedy monster and takes more and more stuff. It turns into a giant dragon, and then the episode ends in a wah-wah. Aethel mentioned in chat a bit ago, while I was still watching the episode, that this is definitely a counter-heavy episode. No, seriously. Yeah. It just calls to mind an old idea. Something that is very meme-worthy doesn't necessarily make something good. I don't like this episode, to be clear. We will actually... You could argue that this is some culture building for the dragons, but the harsh reality is that it isn't. Because most of this stuff will never be mentioned again, to my knowledge. That's not true. It'll be mentioned once in one future episode. Other than that, we will actually get development of dragons and dragon culture and all that stuff much later, but it will completely ignore all the developments of this episode. So we kind of have a thing that leads to a counter-continuity thing, but we'll get to that later. Let's move on. So, first of all, how many times do books get knocked off the shelves in this episode? Like, I know that that's kind of become a joke counter, but it happens at least twice in this episode that I saw. It was 3 times, right? Because, yeah, okay. So we're going to go ahead and just push that up to here. So, there we go. Ponyville is damaged by the rampaging Spike. And the episode, can we just get this out of the way really quick? Absolutely ends in a wah-wah. Dear Princess Celestia, I have learned it is better to give than to receive. Ah, wah-wah. I mean, no, that is a total freaking wah-wah, in my opinion. Just what the hell. So let's just get all that out of the way really quick. Rarity Rush Counter. Crush. Rarity Crush Counter is also going to go up to 6. And here's the weird thing, and this is part of the reason I mentioned this. This is actually why I wanted to have the Rarity Crush Counter. Because I don't think it'll ever go up again. Now, I've only seen up to Season 5 or 6, or whatever it is. I always forget what it is. But I have no memory of the crush between Spike and Rarity actually coming up at any substantial point after this. Like, this is the end of it. I would apparently be wrong about that. When does it show up again? I'm actually quite curious. Because I, again, have no memory of that. Keeps doing this thing. It's like, oh yeah, you've stopped streaming. I don't feel like I've stopped streaming. I could be wrong. I feel like I am still live. What the hell? You streamed for 2 minutes. No, I didn't. I'm right here. Whatever. We'll keep it up there, but I imagine that counter is not going to go up often or much. So, moving on. So I'm just going to be blunt about this. I don't like this episode. Hi, Carwelos. Yeah, Rarity absolutely manipulates Spike into giving her the Fire Ruby, and is totally doing it on purpose, you can tell. It's just ridiculous. He also then does the I'm never going to wash this cheek again thing. Can I just say I've always hated that gag? Like, I usually only see it in bad sitcoms, but it's just... Really? Really? At least the episode then shows him having not washed his cheek and it being gross and dirty. And, you know, Twilight forcing him to clean himself because... So that's a nice touch. Also, notice Twilight can forcibly teleport other people. Interesting to think about. So he has his first birthday in Ponyville. If anything was to showcase that these shows are not a year per season, this would be it. Which, to be pretty blunt, I actually hate that idea. And I despise it, and I throw it out the window. There we go. But it is pretty clear that that's what the showrunners are thinking. I mean, screw continuity, am I right? Actual timelines? Pshaw. But no. It makes me think, though. So he usually just gets one present from Twilight. Now, granted, he's not exactly that old. You know, you'd think at one point or another, Twilight would probably notice the fact that, you know, she doesn't like the books, but whatever. Got a comedy, y'all. This also means that all the people he knows in Canterlot never gave him anything either, so that's fun. So the whole showing thanks thing shows up from the last episode. You remember that? I talked about that? How hard it is to show when you're actually grateful for something. Spike runs into this problem in this episode. Once again, I do sympathize with that. I get that. It's hard to properly express gratitude, at least for me. I always feel like I'm not doing a good enough job. Even to this very day, I feel like I don't say thank you properly enough because I don't know how to. But, a quick aside. I know it would just taste like hurt and blood, but does anyone else think the Sapphire Cupcake actually looks really good? I know well, actually, I don't know if I've brought this up before, but weirdly enough, I've always liked the idea that dragons eat gemstones. It's just a nice little flavor thing that helps distinguish them as a people, which will actually come up quite a bit in the future as well. Well, as soon as I have infinite power, Lord Harrimont, I'll believe it. Yeah, I know, right, Aethel? Look at that, like, oh, that looks so good. I've always liked things that are kind of inhuman when it comes to culture stuff. Like bathing in lava, which actually, ironically stuff, is also a thing that dragons do. But the idea of eating, like, baking gemstone into frosting for a cupcake, there's just something really cool about that idea to me. Because it's not even that hard to do if you think about it. They make a regular cupcake, then they make the frosting, and then they you know, stir in some bits of sapphires, and then they strategically place a few sapphires on top. There you go, sapphire cupcake, right? And yeah, it also lends credits to the idea that we've postulated before about the fact that gems just grow like crazy. Speaking of which, you notice he mentioned earlier that he's been aging that fire ruby. This is more fuel to the fire, to the theory we've all postulated already before, that gemstones actually grow in this setting, either naturally or just around Ponyville, one of the two. Okay, so it'll show up in Season 4. Anytime after that? That does mean it's going to be about 2 seasons worth of episodes before it shows up again, which I'm fine with. As I said before, it never should have been part of the show. I mean, if I could theorize about it, I could theorize about how the harmony of the three types of ponies living in one place probably causes things to be, shall we say, more, not abundant, prosperous? That's a good word. Because you'll notice food, like apples and gardens and whatnot, also grow very, very quickly and very well within the area around Ponyville as well. Abundant? There's a word I'm looking for. Genesis Cave from Wrath of Khan, for God's sakes, right? Like, there's that going on around Ponyville. Which makes me think. Anyways. Where am I at in my notes? Dragon gems, eating stuff, Ponyville's awesome. Plentiful. I like Plentiful. Oh yeah, Valley of the Four Winds is another good example from World of Warcraft. For those of you not aware, both the Genesis Cave in Wrath of Khan and the Valley of the Four Winds in World of Warcraft both have some external source that makes them more fertile or plentiful or abundant or whatever than other places would be. And again, Ponyville being the spot where the three types of ponies are in harmony. Anyways. So, Spike goes out and bumps into Cheerilee, who is quickly becoming one of my favorite side characters. I don't know why, but like she's just a decent town NPC character. I'm liking her. She shows up, bumps. It's like, here, let me give you this hat from, I think it's Thriller? It's definitely a Michael Jackson hat, and Spike does look good in it. Notice he apologizes and then immediately tries to help out. Okay, I'm with it. Now, this is one of the problems that this show tends to have in general. Was it Smooth Criminal? Yeah, okay, I can picture it now. Yeah, I knew it was Michael Jackson. Like, the moment I saw it, I was like, that's a Jackson hat. One of the problems this show tends to have, and I've already complained about this in episodes I don't like, is someone will go from, you know, completely acceptable behavior to completely unacceptable behavior in one step. It's the exaggeration problem. And I've talked about it before. It's a problem with television in general. Or more accurately, a problem with a show that's 23 minutes long. Because they need to shove through, you know, character beats as quickly as they possibly can. I get it. Still irritates me. Because he goes from, oh gosh, I'm sorry, here, let me help you out, to, hey, did you know it's my birthday? In literally one scene transition. One additional scene transition, so that's 2 jumps there, and he's all of a sudden, you should give me something. Give me all those flowers. Little quick. Little quick. And yeah, the show has this problem in general. It's probably actually my second biggest complaint about MLP in general. Because, yeah, I can actually complain about a show I like. Did you know that? It's a weird concept that some people still don't understand. I still get comments every now and again about how, you know, I'm not a real Star Trek fan because of how much I complain about Star Trek. Anyways, moving on. Quick aside, was I the only one who noticed that Bon Bon and Lyra Heartstrings were in the background talking, and then Muffin pops up like, hi, just little background gag. It caught my attention. Anyways. So, apparently, and I didn't know this, apparently Fire Emblem and My Little Pony is the same setting. Who knew? I'm going to wait for a moment to see if anyone actually gets that. So, for those of you not aware of the greater lore of the Fire Emblem series, in virtually every universe of the Fire Emblem games, there's a tendency for dragons to have this thing, which is never properly explained, by the way, where the longer they are around, the more they become wild, crazed animals. They basically lose their minds. Now, that is a very, very common plot thread to virtually every Fire Emblem game. I mean, this is kind of a spoilers, but again, they all do this. There's always some dragon in the background, or as part of the story, who becomes evil, not because they're corrupted, not because they used fell magic or anything else, just because they got old. They basically lost their minds and became feral, mindless, savage beasts, right? Yeah. You'll notice that the way they posit it here is that a dragon gets older and matures and grows because of the fact that they claim more and more stuff. Which means, you'll also notice, by the way, and the show does a good job of showcasing this, ironically, that the more mature he gets, the stupider he gets. He devolves bit by bit and loses control of himself bit by bit until it gets to the point where he's subvocal. Excuse me, that's the wrong phrase. Where he's doing Hulk speak, Spike Wand, and then it progresses another step, and then he becomes subvocal to the point where he can't actually speak at all anymore. And all he can do is go roar and roar from that point onwards. No dialogue. So, again, he is becoming older and demonstrably stupider and less in control of himself as he develops. Now, this is the kind of thing that could lead to a very interesting and dark series of storytellings if it ever come up ever again. Unfortunately, or otherwise, they're just going to abandon this plot thread and never really address it ever again. You could argue that this is a type of like forced acceleration of their natural growth cycle, and is as such unnatural. I mean, we meet plenty of dragons later who are both teenagers and adults who can talk just fine and reason just fine. So, if I was to try and headcanon this, which I don't want to do, by the way, I'd rather just eject it, but if I was to headcanon this, I would say that what's actually happening here is a mutation, not a maturation. Again, that this is an unnatural thing. Now, there's no explanation for why this happens or how this happens or anything like this, but, you know, whatever. I find it interesting to note that that means that most dragons probably have to do something to try and prevent this from happening as like a part of their normal society. Don't give your kid too many gifts for their birthday or else they're turned into giant monsters. Yeah, it's stupid. I'm just going to say it. It's stupid. I feel like there's far more interesting things that can be done with regards to developing the culture of the dragons than careful, if they hoard too much, they'll artificially go... Yeah, exactly, Vigilant. That's possible, Imperial Star. Like I said, we could probably headcanon this. It's probably normal for the dragons to not give. Oh, God, I just realized that lines up pretty well, doesn't it? But that's horrible. Okay, hang on. Let me talk this out loud. Later on, we find out the dragons are kind of jerks to each other. They don't coordinate, they don't interact, and they don't have friendships. That also probably means they don't give anything to anybody, which means they don't receive a lot of things, which means they don't have this problem, right? But then, of course, over the course of the show, we introduce them to things like friendship and gifts, and that means the dragons are doomed, right? No, 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 no. See, that doesn't line up, though, because you don't have to be given something you can take. At several points, Spike deliberately steals and takes things from other people, and that, you know, encourages the mutation. I don't know, this is all dumb. Let's just move on. So naturally, they take him to a doctor who has no idea what's going on and fails miserably. Then we take him to a vet who actually has a lot better of a job in dealing with him, which I suppose makes sense. No, I agree, Lord Harriman. I would rather just eject. I don't want to headcanon this. I'm a fan of Star Trek. I'm used to ejecting things from continuity. Anyways, the vet gets a much better response out of him, which makes sense since he's less intelligent, less sentient and sapient at this point, so treating him like an animal tends to get better results. That makes sense to me. Then they take him to Zecora, who obviously actually knows about dragons, which brings me to a point. Later on in the show, they make a point that they don't know much about dragons. That's actually a major point for several episodes. No, Roaring. No, 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 no. No, I could not even begin to express how much I do not give a damn about the Oscars. Puh. Anyways, so it makes a degree of sense that they don't know much about the dragons. But at the same time, it also makes very little sense unless you presume things that are not good, to put it blunt. It also brings up, why does Zecora know about dragons? Now, I know it's kind of her shtick to be the one who knows everything, but do they just know more about dragons where she's from? Do they have more contact with dragons? That actually sounds like an interesting idea, now that I think about it. Maybe the dragons have regular contact with other aspects of Equestria society. Or let's say just societies that are not Equestria, sorry. You know, the dragons don't interact with the ponies, but they interact with other people more, right? I don't know, just food for thought here. Yeah, Celestia did have a dragon egg to begin with, and apparently doesn't know anything about this? I don't know. Moving on. So, then the books get knocked off the shelves. Of course they do. I gotta share something really quick. So there's this scene where Pinkie Pie is throwing cake at Spike. And they say, stop giving him stuff. I'm not giving him cake. I'm assaulting him with cake. Then he steals all the cake, and Pinkie says, how dare you take the cake? I don't know why, but my niece finds that gag hysterical. I had to rewind and show that scene to her 4 times in a row, just because she loved that gag so much. Then she started assaulting me with invisible cakes. It was really cute. So, of course, they do the King Kong thing with Rarity. They even have a siren alarm. And Ponyville is damaged. We've already done that counter. Fluttershy and Rainbow show up. Good cop, bad cop. The Wonderbolts show up. Now, I had a comment about this one. Now, this is going to sound like a strange statement here. Of course I did, Lord Aramont. What do I look like? A bad uncle? It's okay, I ate some of the cake, so I got back at her. And then she said, how dare you eat the cake? Does Canterlot have a military? They have the Royal Guard, which kind of, sort of fills that slot. And the Wonderbolts occasionally slide into the slot of being a military. But they don't really have a military. That actually kind of stuck with me in a weird way. I know you're going to be like, well, they don't need a military. See, the problem is, and this is going to get into some topics, so please forgive me, but I'm going to go off on this topic for a minute, okay? So, spoiler warning. A nation should have a military. Let me just start with that. But I think part of the problem here is that too many people think of military and they think of bad. Like, whatever words are attached to that, they tend to associate military with bad. A lot of that comes out of the Vietnam era. Like, a lot of that comes out of the Vietnam era. And the idea of, the military being a horrible, awful, ugly thing, baby killer, that sort of thing. Lord knows that's actually one of the biggest problems but within Star Trek. One of the things that Roddenberry was really pushing a lot was the idea that Starfleet is not a military, which is stupid. Sorry. Which I think is stupid. But the reason why he and several of the early authors pushed the Starfleet is not a military idea is, in my opinion, insulting. Because it's an automatic presumption. This is not me presuming this, by the way. They have gone on record on this. It's an automatic presumption on their part, but that a military is a bad thing. Now, ignoring the obvious parts of national defense against other nations, which is kind of a thing, there's also the fact that a military can serve many purposes and functions other than killing people, which I know sounds strange, but if you look historically, you can see many, many, many instances of military personnel operating in an engineering level or an infrastructure level or a connection level or a diplomatic level or an economic trade level. It's not like a military is just there to kill people. And again, I feel that a lot of people who grew up in the Vietnam era tend to kind of lean too heavily on that military is bad mentality. Disaster response and disaster relief is another excellent example. Thank you. Another excellent example of what military can and does do. By the way, I agree. The Wonderbolts do tend to be more of the Blue Angels rather than actual some kind of military force. And yet again, the Iraq situation, not the current one, the older one, is another problem that leads in this direction. Well, it depends on how exactly the National Guard is dealt with. However, a National Guard is a military, ergo, yes, hypothetically. Now, that, of course, would rely on the whole not actually needing to go to war or defend from war circumstances, but it still could fall into the same slot under ideal circumstances, which leads me to my point. Frankly, if I was designing MLP in world building, I probably would have a National Guard. And it would be far more focused on just about everything I was just talking about. The idea of taking care of... how many times do we see some kind of monster rampaging? Or some kind of beasts that are causing problems? Now, that's not a super common thing, but it is a thing that happens. And if nothing else, even if there is no foreign army that is invading, being able to keep the peace within the confines of the local fauna makes perfect sense. To me. Yeah, the main six, as someone mentioned this earlier too, the people of Equestria in general lean on the main six hard. Now, okay, fair, because again, as Lord Harriman points out, D&D logic, you have your elite crew who level, and they're the ones who deal with most of the big problems. I know what you're talking about, Imperial Star Destroyer, and we'll actually get there when we get there. Anyways, I don't mean to go off on this topic as much as I did. I do apologize. It's something that bounced around in my head as soon as I saw them trying to deal with this, and it's just, Because there are several times in the future where the lack of any kind of military or national defense or anything actually causes problems. In fact, to be completely blunt, there's one of my favorite episodes ever is an episode in which the main six are incapacitated, and so the bad guys basically win. It's the episode, I can never think of it. It's the episode in which Starlight Glimmer, Trixie, the changeling whose name I can't think of, and Discord are the ones who have to save the day. It's a great episode. It's actually a two-parter, but it's actually some of my favorite episodes. But still, the point being that all happened because they lean on the main six, the D&D party, so hard, Thorax, thank you, that they didn't have a backup plan. Another fun fact, by the way, in several episodes of My Little Pony, they will talk about the history of My Little Pony, and almost universally, they mention some kind of militarized force, usually the Pegasi. Just interesting to think about. If I might have one last bit of theory crafting before we move on from this topic, for now, I wonder if Celestia being, frankly, a bad ruler is why they have no current military. Because they used to. I'm trying to remember. Another one of my very favorite episodes of all time is... and it's an episode in which they're trying to teach Rainbow Dash how to learn something, and she's failing miserably at it. It's a very well-crafted episode. We'll talk about it when we get there. But during that episode, they talk about how the Wonderbolts were basically founded as a consequence of the existing air fleet, or whatever you want to call it, the existing air force that was beforehand, and Admiral such and such, and General such and such. So, anyways, it's just interesting to think about. We'll probably talk about the military thing in the future, because they'll do some stuff with it in the future. But anyways, I have played Hearts of Iron 4, yes. So, moving on. I actually don't have much else to say about the episode. He's defending his horde, the Wonderbolts get captured, but, you know, B-joke. And then he notices the gem, and Rarity chews him out, and he's like, oh, I remember who I used to be, and it's all undone. Why? How? You know what? Whatever. I already want to headcanon this episode out of existence, so let's just move on. Notice that Fluttershy can keep up with Rainbow as they go to rescue him. Very minor but interesting touch, because that's actually been established before and will come up again in the future. And of course, Spike finally confesses his crush. Excuse me. We won't be hearing about it again for the next 2 frickin' years. Which then, and of course, as I've already said, the episode ends on a wah-wah. That's true, Weods. And that is a valid point. They might have had so long of uninterrupted peace that the very concept of an organized military doesn't occur to them. They just have what is the equivalent of local militia. Anyways. So then Spike's like, Dear Celestia. So first and foremost, there's no consequences for any of this. I hate to be the one to bring this up, but this would be a perfect time to do some good storytelling about how people start to treat Spike differently because of the fact that he just rampaged through the town. I mean, I don't want people to suddenly be ostracizing him completely, but I feel like there's some actual story potential with that. But no, this will never be mentioned again. Also, there's the bit where he says it's better to give than receive. Well, yeah, but this is a really stupid way to portray this Aesop. It's better to give than to receive, otherwise you'll turn into a giant monster. What? What? Anyways, do I think Equestria is stagnating or stagnant? I'm going to go with no to both questions, but I do think that the last millennia of nothing was an era of what I call settling rather than stagnating. Now, there's a very key distinction between the two, because stagnation is when something is effectively rotting from within, whereas settling is basically the step right before that. So, in other words, if the events of the show had not happened, yes, I absolutely think that Equestria would have gone into a full stagnant death scenario. But the events of the show happened, starting with the reveal of Nightmare Moon, which, in my opinion, is the key critical point that sets off pretty much the entire show and the events thereof, which helped to, frankly, reform the country. And we'll be seeing more of that in the future as well. My opinion. But I'm just a viewer with an opinion. This has been sci-fi... Wait. I don't know, Carwelas. I'm not that familiar with the show past season 6, I think. So I don't really know. And I haven't actually seen the episodes past season 3, like, more than once. So a lot of this is going to be getting into more newer territory once we get to about season 4. So it should be interesting. For right now, that's all I've got. I'm going to go ahead and chop off the local recording.